Dr. Mary Papazyan has joined us here for an interview. Thank you for joining us.
It's my pleasure. Good to see you.
Dr. Papazyan, this is not your first visit to Armenia, and this is not the first summit or conference that you are taking part in Armenia. I want to start off our conversation with asking what's your expectations from this particular summit today?
Well, I think it's a good chance to bring people together to continue to explore issues that are important for Armenia's development, particularly in the innovation and technology sector. So it was really good to be here. It was good to talk about the education component, because that's such an important piece of building a strong industry in that area of technology.
DigiTech is known for being a tech expo, but for the first time this year, it's Science and Tech Expo. And coming from your experience as well and from your perspective, what's the importance of mixing kind of science and tech in such kind of events?
Well, you know, technology used to be its own thing, right? And it still is in certain areas. But I come from Silicon Valley, and we see that technology now is really in every industry. It's in scientific industries, it's in health sciences, it's in finance, you name it, it's transportation, it's in every industry. So I think there's real value in bringing them together, because you can't advance technology without advancing science. It's foundational, but that's not by itself enough, I would say. So I hope in the future it'll go even beyond just the science, but it will bring in the arts and the humanities and those who do communication and really think about human-centered design, because that's all a piece of building a technology infrastructure as well.
You've been the president of San Jose State University, and prior to that you have also worked in many educational institutions. I'm wondering, from your point of view, from an outside view, what are the main challenges that need to be addressed in the Armenian educational system?
Well, you know, all educational systems, whether it's in Armenia or it's in other countries, the United States and others, have challenges to be addressed, because they're recalibrating the educational system for a 21st century digital economy. And that's a different world than what we had 5 or 10 years ago. So Armenia's no different that way. Armenia has other, I think, challenges in that, you know, part of what has to happen in all educational systems is that we have to really engage learners with learning. We have to recognize that skills change all the time, so we have to create, not giving knowledge, because students can look things up, right? They can Google them, they can read Wikipedia, they can find information in many, many ways. What we have to teach them is how to assess that information, how to find and figure out whether or not it's really authentic, how to use information to solve problems. It's a different approach than just sharing knowledge. So I would say that's one of the changes that has to happen in the way we think about pedagogy, and that's true at the early grades as well as in the universities. But I think also Armenia is continuing to develop the relationship between teaching and research. And I think there's a lot more to do here, but I know the conversations are happening and there is a great effort. It's a lot of change, but I think the right questions are being asked, so I'm optimistic.
Yeah, that was actually my next questions. I wanted to tell that in Armenia we are sort of in this way that universities are in this traditional way of education, which is the teaching, and we have these scientific institutions that do the research, and now with all these talks we also have the criticism that these changes have no basis, that it's not based on the research, that we don't know how it should be done. I want to know, from your point of view, how should this cooperation between universities and scientific institutions happen in countries like Armenia?
Well, I think in any environment, actually, research and teaching have to go hand in glove. They have to go together, because part of learning is actually engaging in asking questions. And if the faculty aren't engaged in those questions, they're not staying current in their field, they're not reading the latest literature, and it's much more difficult to engage students in asking those questions. So you can't have an absolute separation between the two. Now, in the United States, we do have laboratories. We have national labs. In my place where I live, we have one of the most famous national labs where they just discovered fusion. It's in Livermore. And, but we also have robust research at the universities, and we engage students from the time they are first-year students, freshmen, in research projects working with faculty. And I think in Armenia that doesn't happen until graduate students, and that's new. And so I think if we think about problem-based solutions, that grows out of a research mindset. And so I think there will always be a role for research institutes by themselves where you can concentrate expertise and really develop, I think, on the edge of science or whatever it might be. But you also need to bring it into the classroom differently. And so I think that's the kind of change that can happen over time. But it will take some collaboration. It'll take some rethinking about the expectations we have for faculty. And that happens over time. It doesn't happen quickly.
I'm currently working on a research about the teaching staff of universities. I want to find out what percentage of the teaching staff is actively engaged in research work. So what I take into account is the number of articles published in peer-reviewed journals. And it's not finished, but so far the results are really discouraging. And it's not that only there are very few articles being published in peer-reviewed journals, but also the vast majority is in hard science, if we can say like that. And it's really hard to find any articles published in peer-reviewed journals about social sciences or humanities. I want to know from your also experience coming from that as a president of university as well, how important it is for the teaching staff to be actively engaged in research work.
So I come out of the humanities. So my PhD is in literature. And we had to do scholarship. It's not research in the way science does research. Scientific research has a certain process, right? A hypothesis, then you replicate your results, the whole thing to do that. Scholarship is different. It's asking different questions and really thinking through various approaches and understandings of those questions. The reality is we need both to come to real solutions in a creative economy. And so we need to engage our faculty in any discipline in thinking through why they got into this discipline in the first place. If they're in the creative arts, they should be engaged in some kind of creativity. Because how do you inspire and teach if you yourself have not continued to stay current in it? And so whether it's creative work, whether it's scholarship in the humanities and social sciences, whether it's research in the more scientific method, you have to use the approach that is appropriate for your discipline. And you can't take the science and use that in the humanities. But each discipline has its own approach that's meaningful for that discipline. And now more than ever, we're starting to see cross connections. And that's where things really get interesting.
Yeah, talking about fields, I'm just wondering, is there a way to balance, for universities to balance this, or they just should narrow it down and focus on specific fields because the resources are limited, especially in Armenia?
Well, you know, I think there's always a tendency to do that. And I can say the budgets, whether you're in Armenia for higher education or you're in public universities in the United States or anywhere, there's always a challenge with budgets. And so we always look at that. But we have to think a little bit about what is lost if we start to remove things. We can't do, not every institution can do everything. So you'll have certain institutions that might do more of one thing than another. But in order to actually make progress, you really do need to have the connective tissue. And so you can't eliminate it all. And so I think there's a process that every institution needs to go through to really understand what their focus is going to be and what they're trying to produce at the end. And then what disciplines need to be present for that to happen.
Thank you very much for joining us for the interview. It's a big pleasure.
Thank you very much. Great to talk to you.